What makes a TdM and what doesn't is very much up for debate, so don't listen to anybody who has a very definite answer about what is a proper TdM. I shouldn't say don't listen to them, but take it all with a grain of salt because it's all very much a matter of opinion and nothing is as cut and dry as we like it to be. We humans just really like to sort things into categories, but reality doesn't always cooperate with us on that. Hey there, this is Ina from Taproot Tarot, and not too long ago I did a comparison of this kind of terrible US Games version of the Dodal deck to a couple of other more traditional Dodals, and I kept saying that the colors reminded me of the Cartamundi deck, and what I was meaning to say was the Grimaud deck, and by that I meant this one here, the Ancien TdM de Marseille, and this has been one of the most widely published and popular TdM decks over the decades. Now, of course, a lot of others have taken its place in popularity, but it is still in print. This, as far as I know, is the most recent edition. And of course, Cartamundi did buy Grimaud, which is why I kept calling it the Cartamundi deck. My friends in the comments were calling it the Marteau deck, which makes much more sense because I'll get into the history in a moment, but Paul Marteau is the one who updated the colors. So let's talk about the history of these decks a little bit. And for that, I will use this as an example. This is based on a historically important deck, first published in 1878 by Lequart and his partner. I'm not remembering the name off the top of my head. And it was a traditional TdM based on the Conver deck, which at the time was owned by Camoin. Camoin's original Conver deck, not original, but Camoin's version of the Conver decks is what inspired Jodorowsky. And so Jodorowsky's deck is based on the Camoin Conver. So this Conver is originally from 1760, I believe, or thereabouts. And so these are, 100 plus years later, the woodblocks are still in use and in disrepair from Camoin. I'm guessing it's kind of unclear why Lequart had these images, and it's possible they were redrawn and just based on the Conver. That's a little unclear. In a couple years later, their company wasn't doing very well, and so in 1770, they changed the Papess and Pope to Juno and Jupiter, creating a Juno and Jupiter deck, which is what this deck here is. It's a little bit annoying that this is labeled a TdM rather than a Besonçon, but it is also debatable that it's actually a Besonçon because that is not the way the Besonçon organically developed, which was as a derivative of a TdM type 1, and then going through some cultural changes based on Swiss card making, and a Swiss card maker came back to France and established a Juno and Jupiter deck in Besonçon. So, arguably this is not a Besonçon. It is a Jupiter and Juno deck, which was just a TdM based on the Conver, which is a type 2 TdM, that had the Pope and Papess switched to Juno and Jupiter simply for marketing purposes. Now, that marketing didn't work, and Lequart's company failed and was purchased by Baptiste Paul Grimaud in 1890. And so that's where this 1890 date comes from. And it remained with these colors and with the Jupiter and Juno until 1830, when B.P. Grimaud passed away and passed his company along to his nephews. At that point, the company was run by Paul Marteau, Baptiste Paul Grimaud's grandnephew, and continued to be run by Paul Marteau until 1962. So, Paul Marteau, of course, is also an author of a very famous book on the TdM, which really emphasizes more numerical and elemental readings, as opposed to the more cartomantic readings of Atea and other continental tarot readers of the time, earlier tarot readers. So that was a big shift for the tradition of reading TdM. He also, I think I mentioned, had a big emphasis on colors. And so you can see, not only switched Juno and Jupiter back to the Pope and Papess, but also brightened up and clarified these colors. So that was an important development as well. I should mention, too, that when Grimaud purchased these, he also acquired the original Conver woodblocks from Camoin, and presumably was able to use those to update these images a bit. He had other developments such as rounded corners and really shuffleable, smooth cards, which made his company very popular. And he became successful by industrializing the card-making process and buying up a whole bunch of companies. So that brings us to this deck, created in 1930 by Paul Marteau. The author of his book is just called Tarot de Marseille. I have not, up until this point, gotten a copy because the only English translation has really bad reviews. Now, in doing my research for this today, I gave into temptation. I went ahead and ordered a copy because why not? It's probably not a good idea for a beginner to Tarot de Marseille. Yoav Ben-Dov's book is probably a better option there, or Anna Maria Marsucci's book, those kinds of things. But I thought it'd be nice to have it. And the cover is so attractive. I'm often tempted by it, and then I read the reviews and remember, oh yeah, this is a terrible translation, even by the author's own admission, because the author doesn't have a great command of English. Now, if you are interested in that book, though, just know that the one with red on it has color photographs, which are based on the 1760 Conver, so the colors don't actually match up with Paul Marteau's version. So that's important to know. The one with green on it has black and white photographs. I splurged and got the color one just because I like having pictures of old decks. Now, this version of the deck has been in print since 1930. There's actually a pretty good video from Vincent Pitisci comparing the cardstock and thicknesses and things like that of the various editions since the 60s. This is his deck, or was his deck of preference. And back when he got into tarot in the 60s, this was the tarot deck that you could get. There wasn't like, you wouldn't go to a store and have a selection. He tells the story of just calling up a bookstore in Chicago and saying, hey, do you have a tarot deck? And they said, yeah, we have some tarot decks. And he said, okay, will you set one aside for me? And there was no option. This was the tarot deck that was available in the 60s. US Games, of course, changed that, around 69, 70, 71, when Stuart Kaplan introduced the RWS and brought back the 1JJ Swiss. And so at that point, there were some more options. But I did get this deck because I admire Vincent Pitisci and just thought it would be cool to have one of these available. You will see here that it has some more orange to it, whereas these ones have red. And I'm kind of thinking maybe the older versions might be more red than orange, but I didn't have time to look that up before doing this video. So that's an interesting thing to look into. Now, Paul Marteau owned Grimaud, or managed it, until 1962, at which point it was purchased by Cartes France, C-A-R-T-E-S, France, which had a number of different brands, including Dusserre. So both Grimaud and Dusserre were brands of this company, Cartes France, which was eventually, in 2014, purchased by the Belgian company, Cartamundi. So that's why when you get these boxes, they will now say Dusserre on them, as well as Cartamundi. And this is, of course, a French branch of the Belgian company Cartamundi, so Cartamundi France. And I don't think this says Grimaud on it anymore. This is the usual Grimaud Cartomantic little white book. But any mention of Grimaud, as far as I can tell, is no longer on this deck. Now, some of their decks still do say Grimaud, despite the fact that the company is owned by Cartamundi. Hence why I was continually saying Cartamundi in my last video rather than Grimaud. But I think calling this the Marteau deck makes a lot more sense, so that is how I will refer to it from now on. And one more correction from that Dodal video. I had mentioned I love a Queen of Batons who has a glove in her hand, and said I thought that the Noble Queen of Batons had a glove in her hand, which she does not. Even as I was saying it, I thought I should double check that. And I didn't. I forgot. Sorry about that. But the Conver is one where you might be able to maybe see a glove in the hand of the Queen of Batons. And there are other TDM Type 2 cards where it's more apparent that she's got a glove in her hand, which I absolutely love. So that's just a little side note. But I thought it would be fun to compare the colors of these three decks just to see the evolution and how this one probably influenced this US Games Dodal. So this is a Type 1 TDM, but it doesn't have the traditional colors of the Dodal. Instead, it has colors more similar to modern Conver Type 2 TDM decks. And I thought it would be fun too to compare it to the older colors in the 1890 deck. Just keeping in mind that this does have Juno and Jupiter rather than the Pope and Papess. Now after this, I will then do a bonus comparison of this deck and Yoav Ben-Dov's CBD Tarot, along with a facsimile of the Conver. So this will be just a little history of the Conver decks. These colors are just a tiny bit brighter than they are in real life. Last time I did try to do a more naturalistic setting, but it was too dull. This one is a little closer to reality. And here we have Juno, rather than the Papess. But yeah, you can see definitely more muted colors in the 1890 deck. So presumably Marteau brightened up the colors and created some more contrast in order to make it easier to read the colors, which is really important to his style of reading. And then this Dodal was originally a Cartamundi deck, which was then reprinted, or also distributed, I should say, by US Games. So it makes sense, since Marteau's reading style, emphasizing colors, is so popular amongst continental readers, that a European company would want to stick with these colors, even though they aren't original to the Dodal deck. Now you'll see here the older version has the same color horses, whereas Marteau's version has two different colors of horses, as does the US Games version. So yeah, very different colors between these two, whereas these two, with the exception of orange instead of red, you can see that it follows the same color pattern. And then you get to examples like this, where the colors are a little more consistent, but still some differences. The fact that he's got yellow inside his cloak is really important to Marteau, as far as I know, based on writings that were based on Marteau's writings, such as Jodorowsky and Ben-Dov. Now I tend not to emphasize colors too much. I find that people who do emphasize colors have less flexibility as to which decks they can use. And I really love being able to use a variety of decks. And I would like to learn more about different color interpretations, but it's definitely not my emphasis. This is one where these two do deviate. And we've got a much more panicked, hanged one here with his traditional blonde hair rather than the blue hair. And here, a more naturalistic color of hair as well. Here we can see we've got elements of type 1 TdM here with the face on the devil. So you may have noticed, if you want more details about the Dodal and type 1 tarots or TdMs in general, you can check out my last video. And this one does keep in, this is the Anima Antiqua from Lo Scarabeo, and it does keep in imperfections. So yeah, really interesting color development between the original Le Quart tarot, which had some updates from Grimaud, and then the enhancements made by Paul Marteau. A lot more naturalistic hair in these older versions. I do love a crustacean that is blue and therefore more obscured, I guess, or one with the depths. It's a personal preference, but I like to read whatever's in front of me. This is a huge change here, isn't it? With the color of the wreath. You can see how that's emulated by this US Games version of the Dodal. And I'll go through these pretty quick. Much more interesting multicolored style here. Little deviation here with some green in his tunic, but overall, pretty much follows the Paul Marteau color pattern. Really like the color differences here. The cross hatching is beautiful. And we can see while the colors are more similar between this US Games Dodal, or the Cartamundi Dodal, and the Grimaud/Cartamundi Conver, the floral components are more similar between these two, which are both based on the Conver. I love this deck, the Ancient Tarot de Marseille. It is so shuffleable, the cards are so bendy. I bought a facsimile of a Conver at the same time, which was also a Cartamundi deck, and the cards were much stiffer and had a terrible chemical smell to them. More of that cross-hatch work, which I think is really pretty. Yeah, the facsimile had a terrible smell to it. Here we have Rowan Atkinson, and Giselle pointed out from Madwich Cottage that more than looking like Mr. Bean, it's more like Blackadder, which is so on point. I love it. So I will never unsee Rowan Atkinson in this card. So yeah, my facsimile of the Conver I absolutely love, but as far as cardstock goes, this one, I bought them both at the same time, and this one is so good. And here you can see what I meant, where that could be interpreted as part of her drape or possibly a glove. And there are other TDM decks where it is definitely painted or colored as a glove. We're not even going to talk about her. You can see my last video on that. So here this is still credited as being the 1930 version. It does say Dusserre on it, so that is not original to the 1930 version. That would have probably said Grimaud at that time. It's a little bit of a mystery as to why this says Arnold, and I won't get into that because it's kind of confusing. And this one is a Cartamundi deck. Not sure what that is, possibly a Belgian company. These card-making companies get so confusing when you look into them. So I have a hard time keeping track of it all. Again, a little more multicolored here, and probably the biggest deviation between these two decks that we've seen so far, wouldn't you say? Very pink here and red there. But back to being more consistent here. Probably just because this deck doesn't necessarily have pink in it. Yeah, that seems to be the case. We just have a more limited color palette here, so red is used for both the orange and the pink colors that we find in the Marteau deck. Completely different colors here though. Super interesting. Again, a little bit more green added into the outfit on the Dodal remake, but more or less sticking to those Paul Marteau colors, which would have been an important selling point, I think. This deck is from the 80s, and at that point, it's likely that anyone willing to purchase a Dodal deck would be more interested in one that stuck with the Marteau colors. All right, so I mentioned that both Jodorowsky and Yoav Ben-Dov were very much influenced by Marteau and place an emphasis on the colors as well. So let's do that again, but this time we'll compare this with Yoav Ben-Dov's CBD tarot. That's Conver Ben-Dov. But compare that to a facsimile of the 1760 Conver. And this is one that is also from Cartamundi, but it's based on a reproduction from the Bibliothèque Nationale. So you can see it says both Dusserre and Cartamundi on it, Dusserre being a brand name underneath the Cartamundi company. It gets so weird. So here we have a facsimile of an original Conver deck from 1760 compared to the Paul Marteau coloration and the Yoav Ben-Dov coloration. And again, both Paul Marteau and Yoav Ben-Dov consider the colors very important in reading the TDM. So I thought this was an important comparison to make. And already we're seeing a little more similarity here. This is based on Jodorowsky's work as well, because Jodorowsky influenced Yoav Ben-Dov, and Jodorowsky claimed to have found the so-called original TDM, which was really just one of the Camwan decks. And in 1760, this is probably pre-Camwan, but one would think that Camwan would have been influenced by Conver's original coloration, which seems to be more accurately represented here in the CBD tarot than in Paul Marteau's tarot. By the way, I just love the backs of this Conver facsimile. And having a facsimile of a Conver makes me appreciate it. As an additional bit of information, the Conver for the longest time was considered the default TDM deck, largely because of the popularity of the Grimaud deck. But it is so often presented in these very kind of bold, contrasting, simplified colors that I really appreciate the dreamy nature of this facsimile. Now, as a beginner Conver, the CBD is probably one of the best that you can get. This one or Anna Maria Marsucci's. I would say either Yoav Ben-Dov or Anna Maria Marsucci is a great place to start for learning TDM, as well as Lee Burston. It's just unfortunate that Lee Burston has not created a standalone TDM book. But any decks that have his little white book available, such as the Universal Marseille, which is arguably not necessarily a Marseille TDM because it's a Burdel, which was Los Scarabaeo's default TDM for the longest time, even though it's a Swiss deck from the Swiss pattern. Now, what makes a TDM and what doesn't is very much up for debate. So don't listen to anybody who has a very definite answer about what is a proper TDM or anything like that, because, well, I shouldn't say don't listen to them, but take it all with a grain of salt, because it's all very much a matter of opinion and nothing is as cut and dry as we like it to be. We humans just really like to sort things into categories, but reality doesn't always cooperate with us on that. So yeah, what I'm seeing here is that Yoav Ben-Dov did his research and is really sticking to these original colors quite well, just really clarifying them. Much more so than the Marteau deck. Now I am curious to know if earlier versions of the Marteau deck were actually red rather than orange here. And I will link Pitisci's video where he compares different versions of this deck, so you can see for yourself. And it's a cool video. So yeah, really just bringing some clarity to this facsimile. I honestly don't use the CBD deck much because of the instructions say to like scrutinize every single card in a certain order before using it, and honestly that's just not the way I do tarot. But I did get a great suggestion from Robert Farah from TN Tarot to color them instead, do coloring pages instead of just sitting there staring at the deck. And I love that idea. And I know I've heard that recommendation before, but it makes sense. Like for somebody who needs to be doing something with their hands rather than just sitting there and giving themselves a headache squinting at a card, coloring it is a great alternative. So I haven't done so yet, but that is a plan that I have to get some coloring pages based on Yoav Ben-Dov's deck. And color those in. In fact, I think his website even has coloring pages available. So that is definitely on the list. And you'll see here, all of these have my preferred blue crustacean who is deep into the depths of the water. And you can see too where Marteau gets a little creative with some greens. This dark color here is interpreted by Ben-Dov as a green. That's interesting. I'm looking forward to getting Marteau's book just to see if he attributed any meaning to these rays. A lot of the more esoteric continental tarot readers do, even counting these sun rays here and, attributing different meanings to the different numbers and colors there. So I'm interested to know what he says about that. Again, though, as far as what I've read, it's not a great translation, so it's definitely not a beginner book. Very interesting. In that older Conver deck, we had a green reef here. That is definitely blue in this facsimile, as well as in the Ben-Dov deck, but multicolored here in the Marteau version. Now, is this the only color palette that was created with these early Conver decks? Probably not. And as you can see, over a couple hundred years, the woodblocks changed hands multiple times. So there could be different versions of colors out there for sure. In fact, it would be weird if there weren't. I really love this little cityscape at the bottom of the Two of Cups on the Dodal. Yeah, very distinctive multicolored patterns here, where you can see that Ben-Dov definitely wanted to be loyal to this version, this facsimile. Whether he was using this as his source or Jodorowsky's deck, I'm not sure. I don't have a copy of Jodorowsky's deck. And of course, Jodorowsky added in a bunch of stuff that wasn't really there and made a big deal out of it. So there's a little criticism of his deck there, but my understanding is that it's still a gorgeous and very readable deck. I don't think it's in print at the moment, so not sure that it's as easy to get as Yoav Ben-Dov's, which is in print, as well as his book. There are two versions of his book, the one that he self-published and the one that's currently in print mass market. They're the same book. They have different titles, but it's basically the same book. And although Ben-Dov has passed away, as far as I know, his website is still up and running, and basically everything is there for free. So if you don't want to buy his book, I think the whole thing is available on his website, although the mass market version isn't expensive. And then, like I said, he's got coloring pages and things available. So it's a really great resource. In fact, I will link that for you, since it is such a good resource. The beautiful details there. There we go. All excellent Queens of Batons, although she's a little bit prettified in Ben-Dov's version. That's okay. It's not as bad as that Dodal. I think I accidentally referred to this as the Dodal. This is the Marteau. Apologies. I will try to catch that while I'm editing. But of these three, she's definitely my favorite. She looks very disappointed, and appropriately so. She's sick of all of us, and I don't blame her. We have 1760, and NAS is Nicholas Conver. Conver 1760 and Ben-Dov 2010. And this one, again, as I mentioned before, has the date 1930. For the point when Marteau revamped it. I'm not sure what the 1748 refers to, but there have often been older dates than what is correct, just to give decks more credibility, I guess. And we've got fleur-de-lis on these two, three of them, but a tulip on this one. Gorgeous. I love these. And keeping with this tradition of the title of the valet of coins being on the side, and even the Dodal deck kept up with that. It's an interesting use of pink there that we don't see in the others. And back to the orange here. And here sticking to a more multicolored palette. You can really see how Ben-Dov's work does a service to the details of the Conver facsimile. As much as I love a facsimile, this is really gorgeous. Well, there we have it, folks. What did you think of these comparisons and the little history of the popularity of the Conver? This was all kind of off the top of my head after reading through some stuff, so it's definitely not super organized, but I hope it was interesting. And I found myself reading up on this stuff over and over again because the way the companies change hands gets a little confusing. Do you have a favorite style among these decks? Are you a fan of the Conver TdM, or do you prefer a different style. It is kind of random that the Conver became the most popular TDM deck because there are so many to choose from, but that was one that was highly available and happened to be acquired by the most successful card company of the time. My dogs have an opinion about that, apparently. But we all know it's probably a squirrel. Well, thank you so much for checking this out. My dogs say hello, and I will talk to you next time.